G'day and welcome to episode 12 of Let's Get Fiscal, the official podcast of the Australian Employment Party. My name's Ian Dooley and Tim Jones, the co-founder of the party, couldn't make it tonight, so we're lucky enough to have Una Butarak. Butarak. Una, I practiced that as well and then got it wrong. Una Butarak from SBS. She's a producer with SBS, currently working on The Feed, which is a daily news and current affairs program. And good evening, Una.
Hello.
Sorry for getting your name wrong.
No,
even though
practice.
we practiced it as well. Some politician, hey. So, just before we get started, there's a little bit of housekeeping. As everyone knows, they can find out more about the Australian Employment Party at australianemploymentparty.org. They can search Australian Employment Party on Facebook to get into the Facebook group. They can tweet at Ian Dooley, that's at IAINDOOLEY, or at Fourth Left 2 to get to Tim, and use the hashtag OzMMT, that's OZMMT. Now you can sign up on our website, it's free. We're trying to get to 500 members so we can register. And if you have any questions about what you see or what you read, or you're sitting on the fence about signing up, just private message me on Facebook or DM Tim on Twitter and we can discuss that. Okay, housekeeping over. Thanks for joining us, Una.
Props.
So, the goal in getting you on the show tonight is to talk a little bit about the mechanics of journalism. Journalism is a pretty mystical art to most people, I would say, and it's something that we hear a lot about, like bias in the media. People variously, whether they are left wing or right wing, say that the ABC either has a right wing or left wing bias. I hear it a lot from both sides. So what I wanted to find out from you is just a little bit what it's like to be producing daily news and how the decisions get made of what becomes news and where you get those stories from.
Yeah. So I'll speak about what I do first. So I'm in broadcast news, so I work in TV, which the process is a little bit different in what you prioritize and stuff like that than it is to print, but I'll cover a little bit about print as well. So in broadcast news, you basically get in the morning and you set the agenda. Throughout the night, there would have been a whole bunch of world news that occurred. So you would usually, there'd be a blast in Syria, a shooting in the USA. You kind of follow that through. That would usually be in the news. And then things roll out during the day. So usually politicians, we'll know that, okay, Malcolm Turnbull's going to give a presser on A, B, and C. Later in the day, we'll put that in, and you kind of prioritize based on that. Again, also in broadcast news, we obviously have to work with pictures. So often a lot of stories which might be quite good or quirky or whatever stories might never make it on TV because there's no vision for it. It's very hard to tell a story in TV if you don't have vision. So you are sort of constrained by that as well. Print news is a little bit different in that, so there's still an agenda that's being set, but there's obviously the volume of what's in a newspaper is a lot more than what's in a broadcast news show. And often a lot of what you find in newspapers is actually direct press releases. So, for example, Crikey did a study and found that over half your news that we read in our newspapers is spin. So they found that Fairfax News, I think, had about 40% that was just straight cut and paste press release into their articles, and the Daily Telegraph had something around 70%.
Okay, so I just want to home in on that word spin.
Yeah.
Spin just kind of, the lay understanding of the word spin is just like there's spin doctors and politics and spin. So you're saying spin basically means press releases that are put out by politicians for their own agenda. Is that the idea?
It doesn't just have to be politicians either. So it's often PR companies. Mm-hmm. Will do it too. NGOs, like communication companies do it. So you basically, as a journalist, you get inundated with press releases throughout the day that just come into your inbox. In a 24-hour news cycle and like online news cycle, you're constantly desperate for content. And I think that sort of desperation for content has meant that a lot of these press releases just get cut and pasted and put straight into an article, And a reader doesn't know that that's a press release. A reader thinks that's an article that's been fact-checked, that's been balanced, that's got a counter voice to it, whereas in fact it is just, a cut and paste article from a PR company that's just been put in the news.
Okay, and so that's as opposed to investigative journalism, where they actually go out and find out some stuff.
Correct, which is actually the amount of news that investigative journalism makes is very, very small, because the resources for that need to be great. And most news agencies don't have a lot of resources to send out a journo, on a 3-month investigation to dig deep into things. Like even investigation units are quite small in most news agencies. So those kind of news and that kind of reporting is quite rare.
Okay, and so when you said before that you come in and there's been some world news, there's stuff happening, and then you said that Turnbull is going to give some press release or whatever, or press conference. Sorry, how do you find out about what's your source? What's the news's source for the news?
Yeah, so for us, I guess. We're signed into, as journos and producers, you're signed into the coalitions and the governments and the opposition's media emails. So you basically will get a prompt that, hey, this press release is about to occur. Often the head of bureau will also know all of that sort of stuff because he's sending out cameraman and that sort of thing. And then after the presser, you will get a transcript of that presser so that you can then pull out quotes and grabs from that presser.
Right, okay.
So that's how you know that it's happening.
Okay, which is just really another form of press release.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, these are total scripted events. At the end of each presser with a politician, there's often time for questions, and that's kind of usually that's the sort of quotes and little grabs that you use because they're the unrehearsed bits. Right. The presser itself is completely rehearsed. It's on point. They know exactly what they're trying to communicate to the media and to the public. But at the end, when they allow the journalists in the room to ask questions, that's often when they get grilled, and that's usually the juicy bits that you get that you see in the news.
Yeah, I've heard it's actually. I heard someone talking about how difficult it is to extract a meaningful soundbite that's the right length from what Malcolm Turnbull says. Yeah,
that's really interesting. We were just talking about that on Friday in the newsroom. Malcolm Turnbull is terrible at giving good news grabs, right? Because he's kind of roundabout. He doesn't really have a point when he speaks. Whereas you compare it to, for example, Obama, who is just so succinct and very slow and just on point. He's like a grab machine, Right. Using Obama in your news stories is so easy.
Yeah, okay. So that's a really interesting thing. So I guess, my interest in this, it's all like I take a keen interest in finding out about the way that all sorts of things in our economy work. But I have a keen interest particularly in how journalism works because I'm trying to start a political party, as you might have heard. And that thing of being grab-worthy is something that kind of plays into this idea of how would you distinguish your press release in that tidal wave of press releases that are going out to journalists. How do you know where to send those press releases? Is it a numbers game? Do you just spam the entire industry? Are there like press release portals that you can use? I mean, I know they exist, but are they any good? Is anyone even using them?
It's such an unruly beast. I try and stay away from the PR side of things as much as I possibly can as a journalist and a producer. But it's a fine, in terms of just generically speaking about how to get your message across, it's a real fine line between being so media trained that it's all just bullshit and nobody wants to buy into what you say, as opposed to somebody who's a little bit candid, who like Jackie Lambie, for example, completely not media trained, but gets so much airtime considering that she's just an independent from Tasmania. And that's because she's just in your face, she's aggressive, she gives really good grabs, she's controversial, So that's kind of, that's more generically talking about what makes it onto the news in terms of what politicians say. In terms of sending your message out, I mean, there are tons of communication companies who do this. Like I said, I'm not totally in tune with how those communication companies work, but I believe that you sort of just engage them, and then, you know, they've got the contact base in the media and journalists, and then they mail them out directly.
Okay, so if you were doing this on your own, then basically building a list of it could be as mechanical as just going and finding, because I've noticed a lot of journalists on their Twitter profile, for example, have their email address.
Correct.
It's like send, you know, BuzzFeed, a political editor, send your emails to alice.workman@buzzfeed.com.au.
Yeah.
And so, or BuzzFeed.com. Anyway,
Sure.
don't quote me on that. So it could be as simple as just building that list manually by going and finding journalists who write about things that are related to you, and then sending them emails.
Yeah, correct.
Right? That's the work. That's what you do.
So, and I think also you cannot underestimate Twitter as a platform for communicating directly with journalists as well, and following journalists and that sort of thing. I mean, Twitter is basically just made for journalists and politicians. That's the only people who really use it in a way.
Yeah, I've noticed. I mean, the funny thing, before I started engaging in this whole political process, I hadn't looked at Twitter, I don't know, maybe a year and a half. Seriously, I just hadn't even looked at it. And then all of a sudden, I realized that, if you're going to get involved in politics and journalism and take an interest in social issues and all that stuff, Twitter is absolutely where it's happening.
And, you know, like in the newsroom, so when we're sort of doing the daily news, the way that it looks is you've got two screens open. One screen's kind of your whatever you're scripting and stuff. The other screen has Twitter on it, where you're just constantly getting live updates. And then you've got a TV screen that's got News 24 on it. And that's where you're gathering your news, you know. The scripting, we've got a program that's like a scripting program that has all of the wire services, so like AAPT, Reuters, you know, whatever, that constantly updates news and it will tell you if there's breaking news and that sort of thing. But often on Twitter, you get breaking news on Twitter much faster than you do on the wires or on News ABC, on ABC 24. So Twitter is totally indispensable to the news producing process. And often when we go to air and there's a rolling breaking story, as there often is, it's just Twitter that you're getting all your stats from. You know, you try and fact check them, but you're going, hold on, you know, the mortality rate has raised another 10 people. And, you know, so yeah, Twitter is very important as a platform for journalists and politicians, I think.
Right, okay. And presumably a good place to, apart from just emailing people out of the blue and saying, you know, like, give me a platform because I'm some guy, you know, which is essentially what I feel like I'm doing. I've actually tried emailing a couple of journalists, and it's like, I don't really know what I'm doing here. I don't know the etiquette, but I imagine that if you can engage with them on Twitter and have a bit of a dialogue about something, then they'll see you in a couple of places. Then maybe they're going to be more receptive to. It's not something that's going to happen overnight, right? You can't just send out a press release.
No, and it is really hard. I mean, like when you do choose what makes it in the news, you do want credible voices and voices that have been used before and that sort of thing. Not to say that voices that haven't been used before aren't credible, but it's a lot. It's a much bigger risk to put a voice that hasn't been in the media before in your story. So you do want exposure. I mean, if you want to go down the media stunt path, you know, look at Nick Xenophon. He's done an incredible job of sort of crazy stunts that has totally attracted the media attention, and he's one of the, you know, most popular politicians in Australia today. But if that's not your path, if you don't want to, you know, burn a submarine cake for Tony Abbott and stuff like that, I think slowly engaging with on Twitter is probably a good way with journalists to kind of get that ball rolling.
Yeah, right. So hold on, burning a submarine cake. I didn't see it. Wait, what did he do?
It was a few years back when Tony Abbott made that controversial contract with the submarine companies to buy more subs, and it was his anniversary. I think it was Abbott's anniversary as well. And so Nick Xenophon just went outside Parliament and made him a submarine cake and lit some candles for him. And anyway, he's known for this sort of stuff. You know, he walked around in Parliament in his pajamas and a pillow when there was something in the Senate was happening. Anyway, he's great at media stunts. Yeah.
So media stunts. Study Nick Xenophon for media stunts. and also if you just want to be an offensive racist, then apparently that's a pretty good strategy to get some airtime as well.
Correct. I mean, it is a sad truth that, particularly in print, because you need to get circulation, but also, in broadcast news, we're all about how many people are watching our news. It is a sad fact that a controversial character does make for a colourful story, which would normally be a really boring story. So when you do have people like Jackie Lambie or Clive Palmer or Pauline Hanson, you obviously don't want to be responsible in how much airtime you give them. But at the same time, they do give a different voice, and it's a colourful voice, and that does give more interest in what you're trying to, in the conversation that you're giving.
And bumps up the ratings.
And bumps up the ratings.
Sells newspapers and generates web clicks and.
Pauline Hanson on the front page of your newspaper.
Yeah. Yeah. So I just need to figure out a way to be controversial. But without, I haven't tried racism yet. Without completely compromising every fiber of my morality. So that's interesting. Media stunts, forming relationships, manually just pounding the pavement, so to speak, on Twitter and email, forming relationships with these journalists, and that a good press release, presumably a press release that. I mean, if a lot of what people have to do is copy and paste, if you're able to write a good press release that they can use, then it's the same as having, audio grabs that they can use. That you're more likely to be broadcast or printed if it's usable without too much editing work.
Yeah, I mean, it's a sad fact. And, as a journalist, the idea that does happen, absolutely destroys me. But, the sad fact is that, like I said, up to 50% of press releases just get passed straight through.
Right.
And they come from communication companies, so it's not just some dude sending a random press release. It is usually through verified.
Right, so it's a little bit of a trusted source thing. They don't want to print stuff from just anyone, but they assume that someone is doing some vetting somewhere when it comes from X, Y, or Z.
Yeah, usually you're just being a mouthpiece for that person who is sending you that press release.
Okay, so just quickly, we've got a couple more minutes to go, and I want to address a couple of things, and that's the first thing is bias. So I hear from everyone on the right of the political spectrum that ABC has a left-wing bias, and then everyone on the left of the political spectrum says that ABC has a right-wing bias, which I assume means they're doing something right. If everyone thinks that they're biased the other way, they must be unbiased.
Yeah.
What's your opinion on that, on the ABC particularly, as a sort of industry insider?
I really don't think that I don't think that it's anything as sinister as, news meetings occurring at first thing in the morning and going, how are we going to tell today's stories, today's events in the most leftist way as possible. I think it's the people who you choose to work in the company. There's a certain culture within the ABC, within the Daily Telegraph or News Corp, within SBS, and you choose people who fit that culture. I think it's just about who you're staffing.
Right. So even something like a Murdoch paper where there's not even a question about which way they're biased.
Yeah.
You think that mostly it's to do with that they don't really necessarily need to be having direct puppeteering.
Yeah.
It's more about at the managerial level hiring the right people who are going to get the right stories out in the right light.
Who will angle it in the way that the culture is within that company. So I don't think on the ground journalists are manipulating the stories. I think it does happen at that sort of higher level, at that probably headline level, where like the editor in charge decides what the headline is and how to tell the story in a more dramatic or sellable way. I think that happens at a higher level than just, your journo who's, going out there getting, recordings of what somebody said in an interview, coming back, smashing it on their keyboard, They do that, but then it does go through editing processes. And I think it's at that level that maybe language is changed and certain language is used to kind of communicate. It's very subtle. It's a very subtle machine. But if you have the right people in place to kind of fit that, I think it almost happens naturally.
Right. So it happens by itself. It's not as if Rupert Murdoch's making a phone call every morning to the Daily Telegraph and telling them how to dismantle political debate.
I haven't worked at the Daily Telegraph. I can't. I'd
Maybe it
imagine
is.
that Murdoch is not calling them every morning. I'd imagine not. Yeah.
I think I read a book a long time ago called "Don't Believe It: How Lies Become News" by Kitty Alexander, who also produced that documentary called Outfox. I don't know if you've seen that.
No, I haven't.
Pretty good. It's been a long time since I read it, but that sort of thing about the staffing choices was something I think that she brought up, that it's not as overt as everyone imagines.
Yeah.
Because people kind of have this image in their mind of this, and I think it's like generally any kind of conspiracy theory, the image is of a group of sinister, hidden people getting together with overt controlling strategies, and in reality, no matter what it is, whether it's news or politics or whatever, central banking, people are to a certain extent kind of bumbling around.
Yeah, correct.
Trying to get something done and failing a lot of the time. And then some people are opportunistic and take advantage of a flaw in the system, or there is some corruption, but not in the way that it's like this. It's not
organized. Yeah. It's funny. It's also like you kind of fall into like I've often questioned the way that I sort of just naturally report on things in Syria, in Russia, especially with Russia, for example. Like our natural instinct is just go, ha ha ha, Russia, idiots. But when you start, like maybe there is an alternative to how we think about Russia or Syria. Often there's not time to even engage with the information you're getting that day to that level. It's often just literally just skimming the surface. You're going, okay, this many people died today. This is what happened. Just mashed it in there. I don't, especially in daily news, you do your best to try and like get a huge, get that context in and try and have a broad understanding of what's happening. But it often comes down to, 5 lines and a grab. It's very hard to communicate the complexity of something in that. So you just kind of resort to basic information.
I saw a Media Watch episode recently that said, and this is the final thought I'll ask you for, that Paul Barry was talking about the demise of public interest journalism because of the revenue model that was declining, basically newspaper sales and ad revenue. And it used to be, online is killing print, or online is killing television, but now even online is dying. Yeah. So just basically everything's dying.
Yeah.
And he had the head of Business Spectator, Alan Kohler, and I think it was Eric Beecher, I think his name was, or Philip Beecher. Anyway, so who was the head of some of the gigantic media corporation. And they both said that really the only way to resolve this was for the government to have public interest journalism properly funded, and independent, similar to how the courts work. So the courts are funded by the government, but they're completely independent of the government.
Right.
Is that something, the direction that media generally is going, the funding, and you said that the resources required for investigative journalism are so high. Is that something you think that could resolve the issue?
I mean, as a knee-jerk reaction, as soon as I hear government involvement in news, I just go, terrible, that's the fourth estate. That's, meddling in the fourth estate.
It's like China with a state-run media or whatever.
Yeah, and, as a journalist, I don't know. I mean, I'd love to see more funding for investigative journalism, for feature stories, that tell kind of the human side of your daily stories in more depth. I think those stories are really important to tell as well. Is government funding the answer for that? Oh, I don't know. That makes me very nervous.
It makes you nervous. That's good. It's good to hear. I mean, it's interesting. I mean, it's not good, like particularly. It's interesting to hear that reaction because when those two guys said it, who like they're hardly left wing. I don't know. They might be left wing, but they're total capitalists, right? Yeah. That was really striking to me. I thought, wow, that's amazing that they're both suggesting that the government needs to play a bigger role in funding public interest journalism. Yeah. Because it's kind of vital for the democracy.
I mean, on the other hand of it, SBS and ABC are government funded. SBS is part government funded. ABC is government funded, and their news are absolutely independent of government influence. So maybe it is something that can work if it's written in a charter. If it's
lots of protection.
Lots of protection.
Yeah, like courts, right? Like somehow they need to keep courts independent of government.
Yeah.
So however they manage that.
Yeah.
We could manage it somehow.
Yeah, I mean, if it could truly be an independent sort of resource, and if it meant that there was more independent journalism, I mean, I can't imagine that what government would really kind of want that. With more investigative journalism comes a lot more prying in government business and affairs, and if the last couple of governments is anything to show by, I think there's a big reluctance in that. You look at what Abbott's government did with asylum seeker reporting, where they literally blocked any access and held monthly presses. You couldn't even ask anything about asylum seekers and boats coming in, except for these delegated presses where they were willing to speak about it. That's shocking to me that a government would be reluctant to talk to the media. That's insane. So yeah, I don't know what the answer is.
Yeah. Oh well. On that note. Thanks very much for joining me, Una, and I'll see everyone next week. It was a pleasure to have you on the show.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye.